The small-time commentary community seems to have developed a fascination with animated storytime YouTubers as of late. I think this wave of interest is a long time coming. People like Daft Pina and LS Mark have expressed their own concerns about the community in the past, and certainly others have as well. However, I don't think it's really been talked about before as much as in recent time. The trend seems to have begun with WolfieChew videos. Despite the growing population of people criticizing her, I don't think WolfieChew's well of sins is incredibly deep. I don't care for WolfieChew's content, but a lot of the drama surrounding her, in my personal opinion, just feels so manufactured. I don't think it's WolfieChew these people have a problem with, rather everything she represents. The typical animated storytime YouTuber, the typical animation meme YouTuber, the typical animatic YouTuber, and of course the typical uwu-tuber. Because the problem with WolfieChew is simply that she is nothing special, neither in a good way or a bad way. Obviously, this outrage against non-specialness is going to catch a lot of other YouTubers existing beneath her umbrella of content genre in the fray. The problem with WolfieChew becomes the problem with uwu-tubers, then the problem with animation memers, then the problem with anime, then the problem with animatics, and then finally, the problem with storytime animators, a behemoth so powerful here on the platform that very few, until recently, have dared to challenge it. Already the shift of interest has swept a few other choice names into the drama wagon. These chains of events, these vaguely connected coincidences, my dear viewer, are what led us to the peculiar situation we find ourselves in today. The situation which dredged up a very interesting subject. One I did not imagine being reared into the spotlight again without the advent of some universal controversy. Curiously enough, without any inherent factors besides the net of circumstances surrounding WolfieChew, this character has been propelled back into the spotlight, brought down from the shelves of past affairs, and dusted off for a fresh examination. This, of course, is the animated storytime YouTuber known as Spechie. For those of you who are unfamiliar, I'll try to provide a bit of relevant information which will hopefully sum up the Spechie situation as the mainstream knows it now. Spechie is a slideshow animator with art that I'd say is on par with her age, being a recent graduate of high school. A common criticism of her content, both in art and video style, is the lack of apparent effort she contributes, which I can't say is inaccurate. I'll go in depth with some of the issues herein shortly, but for brevity's sake, I'll leave it at that. If this was her only problem, I doubt she'd be as hated as she is now, but as you probably figured out, there's more to her than meets the eye. Spechie's personality is not exactly the best for public display. In the past, she's been heavily criticized for the aggressive way she views people in her life. For example, her art teacher when she tried to give her criticism, and her ignorance regarding serious topics like depression. This was more than enough to spur a collection of rants and responses, but I was under the impression that most of the drama had died down by now, or at least as of a few months ago. Spechie wasn't really doing anything that warranted a full-blown mob. Somehow, though, public interest appears to be rekindling. I'd like to say it started with the Josh is Broken video about Spechie and her boyfriend. That's certainly where the interest started for me, anyway. Something has always drawn me to Spechie. Not drawn as in attracted in a good way. No, not at all. It was much more of a fascination for me. Out of all the information I've gathered out of the rants and complaints about her, something just felt missing. It was like a dead body, buried on the beach with only the big toes sticking out. There was definitely something there. You can feel it when you walk in the sand, but you just can't see the full picture. Though it always gnawed at me, I never got around to investigating until Josh's Broken's video revived my curiosity. For reference, this video was a character assassination of Spechie and Papa Timmy, two YouTubers who are, surprisingly enough, dating. I think the video was more skewed towards observing Papa Timmy, but I still highly recommend watching it if you haven't already. It's a fun, entertaining video, and definitely worthwhile if you have a few minutes to spare. Regardless of whether or not you do, I think the most profound takeaway of the entire situation was simply the fact of the matter, that Spechie was dating Papa Timmy. I was aware of both YouTubers before learning this, but I was incredibly confused when it first dawned on me. It wasn't something I could rationally imagine happening. The video itself addressed a few of the shared sentiments I had about the circumstances of this unusual couple, and slowly that nagging itch re-emerged. Once again, the big toe in the sand, just barely breaching the surface. This time, however, I came prepared. I brandished my spade and got to work digging. Before I explain my conclusions, let's take a moment to examine the subject itself. Let's talk about Spechie. Watching Spechie's videos is a very unique and almost surreal experience. When I talk about lazy and meaningless content, chances are you're going to think of a channel like Watch Mojo, or maybe some daily vloggers. The soullessness and vapidity of their videos is so evident that you feel drained watching them. Not just bored, but physically exhausted. Now think about unprofessional YouTubers. That can mean a lot of things. Maybe their mic quality is bad, maybe their video editing is choppy and out of place, and clearly uses iMovie template transitions, and maybe the Bandicamp logo is still visible at the top of the screen. Maybe the camera quality is poor, maybe the presenter lacks charisma, maybe they stutter, maybe the script has no point or conclusion. Either way, these things, for one reason or another, probably make you feel uncomfortable or irritated. Combine those two things, the self-awareness of the lazy content creators and the blissful naivety of the inexperienced ones, and you get Spechie. She seems to deliberately put minimal effort into everything she does, and yet at the same time is so unaware of the quality she's putting out, regardless of how heavily drenched in irony and self-loathing she pretends to appear. The content is not polished and clean. It feels unprofessional, but not in an endearing or relatable way, because the only thing stopping her from improving in the end, really, is her own laziness. I like to believe that dedicated followings on YouTube are based off of either content or personality, but I don't think Spechie has either. The fact that she is as popular as she is confuses me so much. Her videos are incredibly sloppy. As of writing this, I've seen her second most recent video, the one about her anime phase, and I was shocked at how, well, bad it was. The editing was incredibly lacking. Even when she did try to spice up her typical technique of throwing images on the screen, it just disrupted the flow and looked awkward. There's been very little change in her videos since 2016 or so, aside from the art being colored and her talk sprites replaced. She's even basically made some of the same videos twice, as with topics like Valentine's Day. It can be useful to remake videos to offer a new perspective on old ideas and to improve the quality of the original, of course, but honestly, I didn't get anything out of I Still Hate Valentine's Day that I didn't get out of the original. Her content doesn't really offer anything. Unless, of course, you're like me. Then Spechie's videos are very, very useful. Her art is more of a mixed bag. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's half good, and sometimes it's, well, not good. Especially recently. She has a lot of potential to be a great artist, and her digital painting skills are pretty impressive, but she makes a lot of beginner mistakes. So many that you sometimes just have to wonder. A lot of them have to do with anatomy. You get the impression that she's the kind of person who will do anything to improve her art except for fixing her existing mistakes. And, of course, putting in an adequate amount of time. The subjects of her art are pretty consistent. It's almost always a portrait of a person, typically a girl, with little or no dynamic action or background. This is fine, of course, but at the very least I'd like to see Spechie improve some of her anatomical errors if she's going to focus on this alone. Speaking of anatomical errors, the heads of her characters tend to look odd. The foreheads are often dented in or simply look that way because she doesn't add volume to the hair and lays it flat on the skull. Her front and side views are usually pretty decent, but she struggles with the 3/4 view a lot. She has a habit of sinking the jaw in favor of maintaining that anime chin physique well into the half turn. It makes the head look slanty and is especially jarring when you put two people facing different directions in the same drawing together. A lot of young artists make this mistake. The face comes to a point when you face forward because your jaw is obscured. When you turn your head, the full width of your jaw is going to be visible, and it's not going to reach diagonally from the chin to the ear. It's going to extend somewhat horizontally from the chin and rise up under the ear, like so. These are things you learn to correct when you're just starting out, Spechie. Spechie makes a lot of weird errors like this. She's somewhat infamous for not knowing how to draw boobs and, well, you can really tell. I get it. Boobs are weird. But, you know what would help? Looking at references. I don't know about you, Spechie, but I certainly don't need an excuse to look at pictures of boobs. She'd probably benefit from that. Probably. In this Steven Universe piece, she also did that thing where she wraps the eye around the skull instead of closing it off. Don't wrap the eye around the skull. Make sure there's a barrier between the edge of the face and the eye. Finish the eyelids, for God's sake. Now, as in... okay, I don't want to say as an artist because I don't want to sound pretentious or anything, and not to say that people who say this sound pretentious, but I just feel like I sound pretentious whatever I say. So, as somebody who draws things, I understand the importance of considering each individual's motivations and attitudes towards their art. If somebody is making art for themselves and has no interest in pursuing a professional career or satisfying the desires of others, and if they prefer to see their ideas come to fruition more hurriedly and don't desire to spend long hours meticulously rendering paintings, I can respect and defend that. I know I make art for myself or for the purpose of practice that I don't refine because it exists only for conceptualizing, and I don't plan to turn them into finished pieces at all. I wouldn't be talking about this, I promise, if not for the fact that she puts herself and her art out there, and additionally for the fact that the problems with her art seem to be linked to her overarching personality. I know, that's a bit of an ambitious statement, but I promise I'll explain myself in a few moments. With all that out of the way, let's get on to what you're all most interested in: Spechie's personality. Remember how I said Spechie isn't endearing enough to make up for her unprofessionality? Well, that's due largely to the fact that Spechie is very edgy. She's not like, say, iDubbbz or Filthy Frank or Mumkey Jones or Turkey Tom or one of those types. She's not an over-the-top caricature that exists to enhance her content or humor. Her edginess isn't entertaining. Spechie's edginess manifests in the form of a superiority complex. She is not being edgy to enhance anything. She is edgy because she is so confident about her opinions of other people that she believes she has the right to be edgy. I'll start by acknowledging two of the more well-known videos of hers: My Art Teacher Hated My Guts and Cringe Factor. These two videos are some of the most striking examples of her ego. In the art teacher video, she talks about different experiences she had with two of her art teachers, big surprise. She then proceeds to rationalize failing that class, likely due to the fact that she specifically ignored her instructor's wishes and created a portfolio for digital painting when the class was clearly intended for graphic design, and claims instead that the teacher gave her a bad grade because she was jealous of her art. This assumption Spechie makes is obviously quite unreasonable. Although she backpedals at some point in the video, the narrative Spechie tries to push is that drawing takes more talent and effort than crafts, and that because her art teacher did not accept her portfolio and teaches in a different way than Spechie wants her to, then she is just jealous. I find her reasoning for this kind of odd, since earlier in the same video, barely a few minutes back actually, she talks about how the digital art program her school offered didn't account for drawing in the first place. If anything, Spechie's art teacher was, in all likelihood, just following the guidelines the school set up for the class. I imagine the real conflict they had was with the art teacher telling her that she couldn't do the thing she wanted to and expect to pass, and Spechie interpreting this very, very negatively. Spechie has a habit of imposing her peeves and personal issues onto the perceived character of others like this. While it is fine to have certain things that you dislike for no particular reason and things that you find cringy, it's equally as valid for somebody to dislike Spechie for the way she acted in her Cringe Factor video. Cringe is nothing new on YouTube. It can refer to a variety of things, but is most commonly associated with people punching down, mocking children, or maybe the developmentally challenged, i.e. Leafy is here. Do I believe that cringe culture has the right to exist? Yes. Do I find it particularly valuable? No. Not really. Spechie's Cringe Factor video wasn't exactly Leafy tier, but it was definitely of the same caliber, viciously berating people on the sole basis that she was personally annoyed by them. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You're allowed to make videos about people who only mildly annoy you. Sometimes it's better not to have a vicious vendetta, but Spechie inserts her moral high ground and superiority complex wherever possible, turning that mild annoyance into what feels like genuine spite. Granted, Spechie tried to turn the situation around by making a follow-up video called I'm Cringy, where she tried to flip the focus emphasis on tried. I didn't get any confirmation that Spechie was leveling the grounds here. For starters, every instance of cringe she listed in the video was something she did at one point in the past. Instead of saying, I currently do blank, and people find that cringy, so cringe is subjective, so you should stop criticizing my video because I understand that simple concept, which I think is a more genuine justification for stating an opinion and would distinguish her legitimate grievances from the exaggerated ones, Spechie only half excuses herself. Yeah, people can be cringy, but hopefully over time they'll get better, like me. That's the impression I get from this video. It's not Spechie taking a moment to acknowledge the variation in interests between people. It's Spechie assuming superiority over the cringe. I used to be like this, but I'm better now. Okay, Spechie. The Warrior Cats fan art you drew was cringy. But you drew it in what? Elementary school? The time and growth between then and now is so large. I mean, come on, you make animatics about you and your boyfriend. You know, the same kind that he said Wolfie Chew was cringy for making. You made Rick and Morty fan art in 2017. You made vent animatics. That's a topic I'll elaborate on later, by the way. All of this may sound harsh, but I'm only reflecting Spechie's attitude back towards her. You aren't this beacon of anti-cringe, Spechie. At least acknowledge your faults. You don't have to self-deprecate and be fake about it, just please show some genuine self-awareness. Spechie also, in the same I'm cringy video, still manages to bash the thoughts when she talks about basic blonde girls during her first cringe story. It's almost as if she's incapable of acknowledging her flaws without pointing out how she's better than somebody else. Anyway, returning to Spechie's character, there are a few recurring themes with the people she calls out and bashes. Obviously, there's the edgy kids, which is a blanket statement that seems to include those who listen to 21 Pilots and not those who are Spechie. She brings up edgy kids indirectly again in her depression video where she complains about angsty teens. I find this bit particularly hypocritical because of the fact that Spechie fits every single criteria for the type of person she's complaining about in that video. She's still within the general age range of a hormonal teenager, and she's assuming that she has depression without any formal diagnosis because she feels sad. These points are both issues that she complained about in the same video. So you can claim to have depression and still act completely unknowledgeable in the subject, but other people can't? I'm not saying that Spechie doesn't have depression. I'm only trying to point out how hypocritical the circumstances of this video are. Despite all of this, edgy kids are not the only people Spechie is commonly critical of. She also has a fair bit to say about popular girls. She had a video where she indirectly called them steaks, she made a pass at an old friend of hers that she called a thought in her My High School Sued Me video, and perhaps most importantly of all, she makes no attempt to hide her disdain for them in what I like to call the pre-Papa Timmy relationship trilogy. This, of course, being her video about boyfriends and the two-part series she made about Valentine's Day. In all three of these videos, Spechie emphasizes something which is painfully clear. She was very envious and very bitter. In the boyfriends video, she even makes subtle passes at this fact, as well as the Valentine's video to a lesser degree. But this doesn't stop her from complaining. Spechie, in these videos, expresses her disdain and lack of interest in romantic relationships. She talks about how she hates the people who make their relationships overly public, which is ironic, and I'll touch on that in a second. She openly admits her bitterness towards the popular girls who always got so many gifts and attention during Valentine's Day. But the one thing that I believe was the most important, although perhaps the most subtle, of her jabs was the part of both Valentine's videos where she talks about how much she dislikes girls who beg their boyfriends to buy them meaninglessly expensive things. Though this entire trilogy of videos came off as a weak attempt to express personal anger and bitterness, I think this segment was one of the most important in beginning to understand Spechie as a person, aside from maybe one clip I'll talk about soon. It's a common method of argument used by people with her mindset. Spechie is frustrated that she's alone, and as it typically is with her, her first instinct is to act on the offensive and call somebody out who seems to be happier than she is. With the opposition weakened, Spechie then presents herself as a much more desirable alternative. I would never make my boyfriend spend all that money on me for something like flowers or rings or girly things. I'd rather just stay home and eat takeout with him. Oh well, I love chicken nuggets. Look at how easy to please I am. Why don't you date me instead? I know that maybe it sounds like I'm looking a little too deeply into this, but with everything I've concluded about Spechie so far, I think this is on par with the rest of her behavior. What exactly is that behavior? Well, you've come to the right place. Let's dive right into my critical dissection of Spechie. There's a lot to get into here. Firstly, I think we can all agree that Spechie is a bit of a bitter person. She holds grudges and is quick to point out instances where people have wronged her, even if the circumstance was completely unintentional. Whether it's her art teacher or some random bloke going about their day that she doesn't personally like, she never hesitates to call them out to complain. But why is Spechie so bitter? Why is her ego so inflated? Well, the answer to this might sound a little bit strange out of context, but Spechie is insecure. This is not necessarily a groundbreaking statement. She's talked about how she thinks she's overweight before and how this affects her sense of self-worth. But how exactly do we go from low self-esteem Spechie to the arrogant, stuck-up Spechie we all know and love today? Isn't that inherently contradictory? Well, no. Not at all, actually. It's common practice for people who are unhappy with themselves to look for ways to shift the blame, to avoid any and all true methods of self-reflection to keep themselves from being devastated by their own lack of confidence. Sometimes people just can't handle the realization that they don't like themselves. I think Spechie's insecurity stems mostly from her loneliness. Like a lot of people, she's self-conscious about her looks, and probably her personality too. And like many people who struggle with self-loathing, Spechie feels like she needs another person in her life to validate her and verify that she is worth something to someone. Spechie says some fairly troubling things in her boyfriend's video. She claims that none of her previous relationships worked because the other partner was not as dedicated as she was, and that she, in her own words, would do nothing short of throwing down her life for that other person. As sad as that is, this makes a lot of sense. She desperately craves that sweet confirmation, so whenever she gets the chance, you can bet she's going to do everything in her power to keep that partner around, to appear desirable. Just like in the Valentine's Day video. When that doesn't work, she resorts to an easy alternative, trying to get over it by acting mad and lethargic instead of jealous. In her boyfriend's video, Spechie claims that she has no intention or need for a boyfriend, despite the fact that a year or so later, where she makes no indication of this opinion changing, she gets into a very serious, dedicated, long-distance relationship, which is probably the worst type of relationship for somebody who wasn't interested in relationships to begin with. In her Valentine's Day video, Spechie claims to hate it when couples flaunt their relationship status in public, even though not even half a year after the time she last addresses this in I Still Hate Valentine's Day, she has no problem posting about her boyfriend everywhere she can. A lot of the petty things she claims to be above are maintained with fragile promises. She tries to dilute her true emotions with bitterness and ego, so it's inevitable that every so often she'll contradict herself. I don't think that this is wholly ignorant hypocrisy. I honestly can't say it even frustrates me. I doubt Spechie can help feeling the way she does, and a lot of the time the only thing people in her situation feel like they can do is lash out at everybody else. I think that art is, in a lot of ways, a necessity for Spechie. If you aren't happy with your core self, the things you can't always change the way you want to, sometimes it's incredibly important to have an extension of that self to balance out that unhappiness. With all the self-deprecation people do, you'd think more can take it, but very few are capable of living with absolutely no self-esteem and accomplishing anything at all. Legitimately hating every part of yourself is not something that you can just get over. In some cases, those alternate outlets can be like a lifeline. Spechie seems to have always been into art. She's probably been praised for it by the people around her since she was young, and I think that's deserved. She is pretty talented. Getting older, I think she may have adopted a sort of dependency to her abilities in order to cope with her lack of confidence in other areas. Unfortunately, this can happen to people in her situation. This would explain the knee-jerk reaction he had to her art teacher, which is why, in the past, she's been so infamously known for not taking criticism. Getting older, and especially on the internet, entering a new sort of sphere of people who have more to give you than just outsider gawking, it can be really hard to listen to others talking down to you about that thing that you do that you've invested so much time into, that you are actually genuinely proud of. So a natural defense is to block it all out and to never change for the better out of spite and fear. Not everyone will refuse to take criticism just because they're self-centered. I'd venture to say that most of the time, people do it because they don't think they can handle that blow to their self-esteem. So, we've established the theory that Spechie's behavior changes to act as support, to artificially elevate herself. She tries to turn her problems with herself into problems with other people, even subconsciously. She acts superior to others because she isn't confident in the desirability of her individual self. Teenagehood, even with Spechie now being out of high school, is a difficult thing to deal with, especially when you aren't happy with yourself. Especially when you're lonely. Spechie comes off as the type of person who is very particular about the friends she makes, and while it's never a bad thing to be mindful and look for genuine people in your life, it's also incredibly easy to get jealous around people who have many friends and are well-liked. It's easy to start to feel like you need a boyfriend to throw your entire life at so you can validate yourself. Spechie really, truly wants to be a desirable romantic candidate. But when you don't have anything good to say about yourself, the best way to promote yourself is to look like the best possible alternative. She likes to bring down the edgy kids and the thoughts, even though by other people's standards she is actively considered both of these things. I remember how badly everyone flipped when she slipped up and told people to stop making vent AMVs to deal with their negative feelings in her depression video, even when she herself made vent animatics. I don't think this is just hypocrisy for the sake of hypocrisy. I think this little jab can be taken to mean something deeper. If there's one thing Spechie has consistently thrived on, it's cringe culture. Her channel was created back around the Leafy era of What Do You Expect? As much as the relationship confuses me, I don't think it's any coincidence that she's dating Papa Timmy. In a weird way, I think Spechie shares a few traits with YouTubers like Shoe on Head and SS Sniper Wolf. All three girls have an abrasive persona, at least partially designed to increase their desirability to a certain demographic. In Sniper Wolf's case, it's video game neckbeards like her boyfriend. In Shilu's case, it's political anti-theist neckbeards like her boyfriend. While I don't think Spechie's behavior is as necessarily bad or artificial as those other YouTubers, I think to a certain extent her ironic persona is a fabrication. She wants to appeal to people like Papa Timmy. She wants to join the ranks of the Leafy kids because they seem to be beyond criticism. They are an unstoppable force, and to risk being comfortable in your own skin is to risk being attacked. And Spechie knows this. She wants to appeal to that elusive group, to verify that in somebody's eyes she is valued. No matter what her actual opinion on bent AMVs is, she has to denounce them because people think they're cringy. I think that this edgy persona that she's made for herself, her reputation and mistakes are all products of her quest to become desirable. I think so because I've been in the same situation and mindset myself. Well, not the exact same. We had slightly different motives, mainly that she's apparently straight and I'm the opposite of that. But our core issues remain fairly consistent. Around the time that I first started going through puberty, I became increasingly lonely. I never really had a problem with being single or having few friends before, but as I went on, I desired that contact more and more, and my self-esteem became worse. I didn't understand why I couldn't find a girlfriend, even though that's not exactly something you're immediately entitled to the day you begin 8th grade. I was impatient, I was bitter, and I was incredibly insecure. I blamed the girls I was interested in for being straight by assuming that they were masochists who only wanted to be in a relationship with the most stereotypically masculine jerks. And so I decided the only way I would get attention was to act like my warped interpretation of a guy. I was arrogant and slung around things like cringe and refused to tolerate anything I just didn't like to see. But nothing came out of it. I tried to hide my unhappiness with anger and bitterness. I suppressed my interest in favor of being a hyper-ironic edgelord, and when that wasn't enough, I blamed everyone around me for being subconsciously conditioned to reject me. I thought nobody liked me because everybody else had shallow values. Turns out that wasn't it at all, and it was just because I was a jerk. And ugly. But mostly a jerk. I nearly ruined my relationships with two people who were very important to me at the time, and the only thing that eventually snapped me out of it was the realization that it was all my fault. I was making myself much more unhappy than I already was. My self-esteem and overall mood was massively improved after that. I figured myself out, and I got a girlfriend, and now I'm pretty content with myself. I guess the main takeaway from this story is, don't let this type of thing happen to you. Even if you feel alone, there will always be a better opportunity for you. And you can't solve things by forcing yourself to act like something you aren't. All this stuff will come to an end eventually, I promise. Especially if you're still young. Despite how aggressive I might have sounded earlier, I don't hate Spechie, and I don't want you to hate her either. I don't think she meant anything harmful with her depression video or any of your videos, no matter what actually ended up happening. I think she does want to inspire people positively. She wants to appeal to girls, or guys, going through the same feelings and emotions as her, and if not for the fact that she was dealing with them in the worst way possible, this would be pretty neat. I really don't want to see Spechie suffer through life as that person that everyone hates. I want to see her succeed. I think she's a pretty talented artist, and she can be pretty funny. Her personality isn't all bristles and edge. She recently started accepting criticism for her art and videos, and hasn't made a snide comment back at anybody since. Well, almost, but we're getting there. If it was Papa Timmy that inspired this change, directly or indirectly, I applaud him, but otherwise I have to say I'm kind of worried about what the relationship could do to her. If he is just using her for popularity, and I know it's unlikely, but there is a possibility, you can imagine how harmful that could be. If he continues his leafy cringe mentality around her, it could push her back further from her true personality. However, there's just as much possibility that the two of them can learn and grow positively from each other, and I very genuinely hope they do. I hope Spechie is happy. But then again, I could be completely wrong about my Spechie character analysis. What do you guys think? Feel free to argue in the comments, and once you're done with that, it would mean a lot to me if you could like the video and subscribe. I'm a small channel, and every bit of support helps, if you have the time, of course. If you're bored, I've listed my social medias in the description, Twitter, DaveandArt, my Discord server, so if you're curious about those, feel free to take a peek. Additionally, thank you so much to Violin for helping me with editing. They have a channel that's kind of similar to mine where they do various commentary responses, and I'd appreciate it a ton if you check them out and give them some love. See if what they do is your style. Who knows, maybe if you want more Spechie videos, there'll be something for you there in the future. I'll link them in the description for your viewing pleasure. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I hope you had a fun time. Bye!